most enigmatic, controversial, inflammatory to some figures in all of ufology and contactology is certainly Swiss farmer Billy Meier. The Billy Meier story has been known for a long time by virtually everyone studying this business. I've done programs in the past about it. Many people have certainly looked and discussed and picked apart and praised and been awestruck and mocked and all other types of descriptors. The photographs that Billy Meier has produced, taken, been allowed to take with his cameras. There are many ways to look at all this, and all ways have certainly been on the table over the years. It's an issue that remains to be resolved. People who have studied Meier for a long time, including my next guest, remain irrefutably convinced that he is telling the truth, most especially about his contact materials given to him from visitors, which in many cases turn out to be more than prophetic. The issue of documentation remains one that is of controversial nature. There apparently is strong reason to believe the explanations of the Meier supporters that many of these, I'm going to call them prophetic pieces of information, communications, which have been written down by Meier in the past, years and years ago, are in fact legitimately documented and are in fact real. If they are real, it would make Billy Meier one of the great prophets of our times. Of course, throughout the ages, prophets, most of them who weren't burned at the stake and many who were, often bring unpleasant news to people. They don't like that. Billy Meier is no exception. The material he has produced are certainly, at the very least, very accurate and profound warnings of harmful issues. It's a very controversial story, and I thought it might be good to revisit the Billy Meier prophecies, the Billy Meier information, the Billy Meier story, with Michael Horn tonight. He is the American media representative of the Billy Meier UFO contacts. Welcome, Michael. How are you?
Great, Jeff. Thank you very much. Could I say one quick thing?
You can say a lot of quick things.
Okay, good. Because your listeners are not privy to the fact that you and I have corresponded for some time back and forth, and you and I have expressed to each other points of view about the Meier case that don't always, overlap and coincide. I want to kind of just take my hat off to you for, number one, posting the articles that you have that I've submitted to you, and number two, especially, for having me on to, try to make the case for Meier's material. So it's not a small thing, and you and I certainly know we've gone back and forth enough that I wanted to acknowledge you to your listeners. It's a noble and ethical thing you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I try to do that. That's what I think we're supposed to do in this business, and I appreciate you saying that. What first got you interested in Billy Meier? Remember the first day you heard about Meier?
Yes,
did that change your life?
Yeah, it did. It was walking into a bookstore in the West Hollywood area of Los Angeles called the Bodhi Tree, which is the metaphysical bookstore in that neck of the woods. Walked in, there was a coffee table-sized photo book of photographs. The cover photograph was quite compelling. I picked up the book and I looked into it and at it, and I just said to myself, well, this is real. Now, believe me, in the 25 years since that time, I've done a little more work than to base my conclusions on my quote-unquote sense that it was real, but that was exactly what and how it got me into the case.
So that book, by the way, I don't know if it's still around in print, but it's around, and it's something you can't walk by without picking up and leafing through. It's really staggering.
Compelling.
It's totally.
Yeah, and I can tell you that there will be a new photo book coming out where they have taken the photographs, many that hadn't been seen before, and I believe they digitized them for clarity. I'm sure it's going to be more controversy, but I've seen the German language version of it, and they're stunning and they're clear, and there'll be an English language version of it that the publishers will put out at some point this year.
Good. All right. Well, it's at the very least a certainly fascinating and intriguing body of material. No matter what your final disposition personally, you folks may be with it. Tell me about do we call it the prophecies, the writings? What do you call the Billy Meier material?
Yeah, well, it's called very often the contact notes. Well, let's put it this way. The contact notes refers to a body of material that first saw publication in and around, I think, February or so of 1975. At least in English. They might have been, they probably weren't published much before that. They probably were actually first out in the German language. The English language translations of them were available in America certainly by the early to mid-1980s, and I came upon them in a funny way, and if I may tell you and your listeners, because I've already received some email, your site is quite active. I already received emails from people before we did the show.
Sure.
In 1986, I was in Sedona, Arizona, another hotbed of experience, energy, and with a high woo quotient. I was in a little place, I think it was called something like the Sunflower Cafe, with my daughter, another friend, and the only other person in the place was sitting in the far back, a guy. We'd ordered a little avocado sandwiches, and we're waiting, and in true New Age fashion, they were going to take an almost interminable period of time to get to us, but they'd be prepared with love.
Well, they had to be blessed, sure.
Blessed, the whole thing. The sprouts were being grown in the back while we waited.
That's right.
So we got to see with the fellow in the back, and he and I, he came over to the table, whatever, we sat and we talked, and UFOs came up, and ultimately, of course, the Meier case. And he said, well, have you ever read the contact notes? And I said, what are the contact notes? And he said, well, you've got the picture book, right? I said, yeah. He said, in the columns, you ever notice those quotations that weren't spoken by Billy? I said, well, yeah. He said, well, those are little excerpts from about 1,800 pages of conversations that Meier supposedly has already had with these people. I said, wow, really? He said, yeah, come back, when you're in L.A., come up to Decker Canyon, and I'll give them to you to look at. So I went up, and this fellow's name was Ralph Amagran, and he had all the Meier material. He had the posters with the photos, and he was well-versed in the case. And true to his word, he did loan me all the material. And I stayed up for days and then weeks and months reading the Swiss-German language person, whoever translated, constructed the sentences more like German than English, so it was a little difficult. And anybody who's read those contact notes knows what I'm talking about. I should add that Ralph later on had a metamorphosis of his own, apparently, and he became Alex Collier, and he also overnight became a lifelong Andromedan contactee.
Alex Collier, of course. I didn't put it together. He's been on a couple of times over the years, and Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. So without saying much more about that, we'll let that part of it be absorbed as it will by anybody that's listening to this. I became fascinated with the contact notes, and I read them and read them and read them, and then, would keep them under the bed and pull them out and read them again. That was 1986. About 1987 or so, I met a fellow named Randy Winters. Randy was, at that time, representing officially or otherwise the material in America. He had the contact notes. He held little meetings. He and I ultimately went on to produce, within a year of our meeting, a video called The Pleiadian Connection.
Randy's been on several times.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what happened was he had showed me some material that he had gotten from Switzerland that was in English that had not been published broadly, and we're talking about prophetic material, and this will come up as we kind of build the sequence of it, if I may.
Sure.
So Randy and I were talking, and he showed me this other prophetic material, and it was very intense, and some of it didn't seem to make sense because it's talking about weapons and things that didn't exist and what have you. But during that period of time, when 1988 hit, I was reading a newspaper and opened it up, and there was an article from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories. And I've put this stuff, this is all on our website, I tried to put it in a readable form. And the article from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories was something to the effect of A-bomb testing tied to ozone damage. And this was, as I read the article, this was a new finding. And I went, wait a minute, why are they saying this is new? I've read this somewhere. Mm-hmm. And I went and reached under the bed, and there in Meier's earliest contexts, like the 7th and the 34th and 35th, all back in 1975, here were these conversations allegedly between him and some alleged extraterrestrial woman being referred to as Semyaze, and she's going on with very specific information about how our scientists didn't yet know that atomic bomb testing and detonation, including the detonation that had been done to the people in Japan, that these explosions had produced all sorts of havoc that we weren't even aware of, that these explosions set forth what they called elementary radiations. These were electrical frequencies high up, I think, in the UV range that we didn't know existed. We had
And also, Michael, apparently extend far beyond Earth, do they not?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they go right up through, and they rend holes in the ozone, and then, they just kind of keep on going.
Keep on going, and they'll impact, allegedly, they impact people and planets a long way away.
Could be that. I don't know. I don't have any information about that, but that may well be.
Well, they entered the ether. The ether picks things up.
There you go.
And transmits it, God only knows how far. All right, stand by and click on Michael Horan's website. If you want to see some of the Billy Meier, the classic photos, look at the top. It's called andyettheyfly.com. Look at Photo Gallery, click on that, and you'll see a number of the very famous Meier photographs, which are all in vivid color, taken in Switzerland. Be right back. Hi, right back with you. Michael Horn is my guest, talking about the Billy Meier contact papers. Go ahead, Michael.
Sure. I'll finish on that a little bit about the Avon testing because this was the earliest information that was officially published that I could check out, and I did because it came up. When they spoke about these elementary radiations and these frequencies that were penetrating, as you mentioned, at least the ozone damage, they said what happened is this would lead to UV coming through the holes, killing off various microorganisms, leading to disruptions in the food chain. There'd be genetic mutations, all sorts of other negative events. They ultimately also said that these explosions were disturbing the magnetic balance of the planet, that we'd have at least 4 centuries of negative effects. Our scientists knew nothing about it. Well, the first article came out in 1988 in Lawrence Livermore Labs, and then that's 13 years after Meier had already, had this conversation. In 1991, there was on National Public Radio a blurb that I heard. He had also been told that bromine gases were another contributing factor to ozone damage.
Okay.
So that was confirmed in 1991, so that was 16 years later. And then there was an article in the Los Angeles Times in 1992 of the ozone hole damaging the food chain. Now, I know that probably many of your listeners have access, to the articles and to the things that I would be referring to, so I'm not going to want to read everything verbatim that they could, and maybe some people don't have that access, but I don't know if they're hearing on the internet. They probably do.
Well, I think the most important thing is to continue to establish the time differentials between the contact materials and provenance whenever you consider that to have been affected.
Sure. If I may, just for those people that have had, let's just say, issues with the physical evidence, the photographs, the sound recordings, the film, there's a video. What happened in the case of all of that hard evidence, except actually the video, to the best of my knowledge, it all was analyzed by scientists. I mean, I do have the names of all the people that...
Oh, I know the visuals. Yes, they were scrutinized about as closely as any pictures have ever been scrutinized.
Plus, the sound recordings, which are posted on the site in our irrefutable scientific proof category, are downloadable, and people are invited. This is physical evidence, as if something dropped in your backyard. Go and see if you can duplicate it. What I did, and this is just to try to deal with the physical evidence, because really, I don't want to argue photographs and films, especially since I'll just say the alleged wants to cover it all for the whole conversation. The alleged ET said to Meier, look, at a certain point, we're not going to give you any more photo ops. It's not necessary because people already think you're a hoaxer, and now with computers and these techniques, why bother doing it if people will just all...
Well, we're in the digital age, and anything's possible.
Just about. So this is the one I wanted to bring up. Because anything's possible, and so many skeptics have lambasted the case, and people who just say, well, it doesn't look credible to me. A couple years ago, I went to the Professional Skeptics organization called CFI West, Center for Inquiry West, located at that time in Culver City, Los Angeles area. and I met with one of their lead investigators, whose name I do now use. I didn't for a couple of years because I wanted to see if he was going to come forward with anything, Rense, and I showed him the classic reel from the videotape of Meier's, UFOs circling around and flying and jumping, what have you, and I showed him some photos, and he said to me, "This is an easily duplicated hoax." I said, "Great, save me some trouble. I'm out there, I'm about to go out and do interviews and lectures. Maybe I'm an idiot. Sure looks real to me, but you're an expert. Do me a favor. Will you duplicate one of the photos, and will you duplicate one of the film segments?" He told me, and he says, "Oh yeah, I can do this with an 8mm film camera." He just scratched the negative to make this light go on, and a piece of cake. I said, "Fine." That was in February of 2001. We conversed, and I saw him 2 other times up until about May of that year. He didn't have anything to show me. This easily duplicated hoax was somehow a little more than he was ready to deal with. Ran into him a couple months back at a UFO Congress kind of presentation at the expo in LA, like a whole life type of expo. Talked to him there, and I said, "Well, photos, are you going to present anything?" He said, "Well, we've got a photo lab that's being set up soon, and I'll be able to do it." I said, I don't want to sound like I told you so, but you've had 2 years plus to give me one photo and one film segment. In that period of time, Meier came forward with something like 1,200 photos and 6 film segments, and he didn't have a photo lab, and he's got one arm, and nobody can find accomplices, models, computer tricks. I said, "Go and use computer if you want, but if you want to be a sport, use one arm." Well, that didn't sit well. Okay, and then I sent stuff to the amazing Randy and to Michael Shermer, the science writer for Skeptic Magazine, and basically I've been in their face with this, and we've posted, as a matter of fact, you even posted some of it on your site, the back and forth and what have you, and I've been saying to these people, look, you have to put up or shut up. It's not sufficient to say it's a hoax because I said it's a hoax, thank you, goodbye. So in terms of dealing with the hardcore skeptics who had, thoroughly debunked the case, the point and the truth of the matter is, up until this exact moment in time and space, they have literally run away from it, and it bears saying.
It does bear noting, and that's a pivotal aspect in this whole controversy.
Yes.
I agree. Stand by, Michael. We have to pause again. Be right back with Michael Horn in just a couple of minutes. Don't forget news around the clock going up there for you at Rense.com. We aim to bring you material that will provoke you at times, make you unhappy at times, make you very pleased at other times. The idea is to expose you to all sorts of different things. We don't want people just reading that which makes them feel good. There's no growth that way. And remember, we don't agree with all the material up there, but we do think it's worth reading for a variety of reasons. Be right back. Papers will be the discussion of the next hour. We're moving through some other materials now, but it's all predicated on documentation. If we can accept as valid the claims of the times at which these materials were made available to Meier, then we have a real issue of accurate forecasting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the case, in a sense, like anything, it boils down to, is it true or not, and how are you going to prove it? In this case, not that it is the proof, it's kind of interesting that the public aspect of this has been going on for close to 30 years, and Meier claims, since he was 5 years old, which makes it 61 years. So if it's a hoax, he's got to have some wacky agenda for going through the difficulties that it's brought him, and to say nothing of, we'd love to know how he did it. If it's true, and this is why I sometimes just stop in my own tracks, it would be, in my opinion, the most important event in human history. In other words, verified ongoing contact between an Earthman and an extraterrestrial or a number of extraterrestrials, if that could be verified, stop the presses. So I'm going to try to do my best to, you can tell I get excited about this.
Sure.
And I want to see if I can, just answer some of these questions and at least direct people to be able to go and figure it out for themselves, because the stuff that I've compiled and published on the website and the things that I'm going to say are a result of my doing what we can now do pretty easily these days. I took the information and I went into the search engine. I think I used Google mainly. Mm-hmm. And I would take something like, the A-bomb thing. Even though I'd seen that for the first time in 1988, I researched it, researched it on the internet to find out what was the first time that this was. I couldn't get anything before 1988. And the same thing with each of the things that I'll run through in terms of trying to lay the groundwork for credibility here. Now, I think on the list of things I had stopped with this idea of the ozone damage and how he was told about this in 75. So let me give you another one that was documented for 1976. Now, I should say this. In Europe, there's many people that have the original German language contact notes. In America, we didn't get them until early to mid-'80s. But they were in my hands in 1986. If something comes out in 1988 as a new discovery, and in the material that I'm already holding, they're saying that this was told to him in 1975, at the very least, he's 2 years ahead of the curve. And more, because we've got to give some benefit of the doubt that they didn't just pop into my hands fresh off the presses from overseas. If you know what I'm driving at, we've got to...
Yeah.
And we have to be really critical of this, because if you're going to build a case, it's going to fall apart if you really can't prove and document. And, you and I have discussed that in our email a bit. So let me just jump to the next one. In 1976, in February, and I'll kind of go off the stuff that people can look at here so they know what this is about until we've, had enough one way or the other. Meier was warned that the extraction of petroleum and natural gas from the earth, and he was also told additionally the damming of waters and the construction of huge cities, that these were contributing factors to earthquake and volcanic activity. And after I bring the corroboration in here, I'll tell you another thing that he was told a little later.
1976.
Yes. So I was reading a newspaper in 1990, and all this stuff is, as I say, listed on the site, and there was an article, Earthquakes, Oil Interact. Now, that was from a scientist at Stanford. We do have the articles still, and we didn't put them all in here, but, we probably at some point, if people are fussy, will certainly post them, or they can do their own searches. Maybe they'll find some earlier corroboration or what have you, or prove my wrong. So anyhow, there you got, that was 14 years prior to that discovery by the scientist from Stanford who saw the connection between the extraction of petroleum and earthquakes. Well, Meier was told that in conversation in 76. Later on, in another conversation that was some years later, they were referring to this whole insane consumption of petroleum, and they said, well, humankind is kind of foolish, because with these reservoirs of petroleum and underground bodies of water and all of this, these are shock absorbers. This is the synovial fluid, the shock absorbers of the planet. If and when, as your planet surely will, if there's an asteroid or a meteorite strike or something like that, you have been extracting the buffering, the absorption of shock. So if one of these things hits in the right spot, meaning the wrong spot for us, you're going to have cracking of plates, magma spewing up, where it didn't have to happen had you ceased to exploit the planet in this fashion. Now, remains to be seen, but it's not exactly a far-fetched idea. We can say for sure that the scientist from Stanford in 1990 came up with this finding, of the interaction between earthquakes and the extraction of petroleum.
It makes perfect sense. You pull that much liquid out of the earth, and certainly with the countless earthquake faults, which are often sitting ready to be triggered by groundwater or motion. You do that, you change the dynamics of plate tectonics or certainly geostresses, geological forces within a specific finite area. Things are going to move.
They are going to move.
It doesn't take much to figure that out. Okay.
Yeah, some people say, well, we can fill those spaces with water. The spaces that were filled with petroleum in the wisdom of nature and the earth put the petroleum in the places that the planet needed to have it. That viscosity. Okay. So we jump over to the 31st Contact, 1975, where there's specific information about Venus that is given to Meier when he ostensibly is taken up close and personal to the planet, and he's shown it, and Semyaze is giving him some of the specifics on the composition of the gases, the depths of the cloud banks and the surface temperatures and all this stuff, atmospheric pressures, what have you. That was in July of 75. The earliest U.S. corroboration was in August of 76. However, the USSR had a probe that went in October of 75, and between those two time periods, his information was corroborated. There was further corroboration 5 years later when the USGS was doing a topographical map of Venus. Wendell Stevens, Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, was there, and he saw that they were virtually duplicating what Meier had described.
Wow. Well, all right. It's fascinating. And the whole Meier case is one of those cases that, let's just suppose 10% of it, 20% of it is bogus. That leaves 80% that's real. Let's reverse that. How about if 80% is bogus? That leaves 20% of it as being legitimate and real. These are very important issues to consider in that light, and wherever you want to draw the line, it appears that this issue is not going to go anywhere but forward and continue to cause controversy and win converts over time. Be right back with more. You can see at his website. Just click on his name and yettheyfly.com. The classic Meier photographs are there, as are many other things as well. Okay, Michael, go ahead.
Sure. You know, you brought up a very good point. That 80-20 thing, it reminds me of I guess it's the classic disinformation thing, 20% is truth wrapped in 80% of a lie. And indeed, with any of these things, you have to see how much is so and how much is not so, and that's, of course, a matter of due diligence.
Let's look at it this way. If Billy Meier, for whatever reason, faked one picture, does that throw the whole thing out? In the minds of some, it does.
It would.
But let's just say that he did fake a few pictures, but that the rest of it is all true. He's human. Maybe he made a mistake. I don't know.
Yeah, my take on that, it's almost like I could paraphrase it. I would say the skeptics have to be right every time. Meier only once. In other words, if he has
that's a very good way to phrase it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do know a little bit about the story about photos of models and what have you, because among other things, Wendell Stevens and crew brought models to Switzerland to re-photograph in the places where the original photographs were taken.
That's right. We've discussed that with
that whole story.
Winners, and
right.
It's an important angle, and it was used by both sides to prosecute their war against each other.
That's right, and that's why I basically say I'm not going to argue the physical evidence, because there is a higher standard of proof, and that's really the stuff we're talking about right now, if indeed it's true. And again, anybody can go and do the due diligence. I've given some of the information. You can go do searches. It was interesting because we left off with the idea of Venus, and the last thing was that Wendell.
Let me ask you to go back and cover that again. I just want to make that point. The year, the information he was allegedly given on board a ship.
Right.
About Venus.
Right.
Tell me that again.
Among the things that he was told, and the year was 1975. I have it as the 31st contact from July 17th.
And these, again, were published in German at that period of time.
Right.
They were available, they were published, they were released.
Yes.
Right.
And, of course, as I say, I only got them in the mid-'80s, and, there you go with that. But I'll show you how that comes into play more and more as we move through this. He was given specific information about Venus, and some of the people who are looking at that on the website can see the information was unknown at the time, and it had to do with the composition of atmospheric gases, surface temperatures, depth of the cloud bank, wind speeds, atmospheric pressure, a lot of stuff. Now, let's also just flash back and say this is 1975. It's pre-internet. You're dealing with what is known. This is a one-armed man raising a family of 3 children in a marriage that would become all the more volatile because of these dramatic events ongoing around him. It was the beginning of the time when people started to take pot shots at him. There are now 19 documented assassination attempts. An awful lot of trouble to get rid of a hoaxer. So, we go to this information. Then what I was...
Excuse me.
Yeah.
19 documented assassination attempts.
Right.
Are these the world's poorest shots? Or is Billy Meier the world's luckiest target?
Well, this is an interesting thing. I had talked to Wendell some years ago when I was just getting into, a little more of the meat of this, and he was saying, I asked him about, is this really true? Are they really shooting at him? He said, I was over there, and we were sitting on the porch, and Billy was talking, and...
I've heard this story.
He falls in his lap, basically, at the same time this cracking sound. They get up, and there's a fresh .22 dum-dum bullet where Billy's head had been.
That's right. I've heard it. Yeah.
Okay, he told me that, personally. In the book the publishers have, there's photographs of, a little book, I think, that Meier had in his pocket, and he put a little metal plate in it, or what have you. Some of it, times he would have, a precognitive dream to take a special precaution. For a while, ostensibly, these alleged ETs were protecting him. And that, they did a pretty good job. And some of the attempts on him were pretty serious. There's a fellow over there named Silvano who's just a dear guy. He's kind of the main groundsman over there is the way I call it. He's kind of a master of the maintenance of their property. And he's told me he witnessed, I think it's 5 or 6 of the assassination attempts. He was next to Billy. And I think rifle, knife, someone threw a hatchet at him, and I think handgun as well. Now, you talk about the world's poorest shots. When they took over their ramshackle property over there in, I think it was 78 or something, they started planting trees. Today there's 10,000 trees that they planted, and Silvano said, you have to understand we planted a lot of this to make it harder for people to shoot. So somebody sitting up on a car on the road, because the road curves above their little center, we don't want them to just have a clear shot down of Billy sitting outside or somebody else.
Who wants Billy Meier erased?
Well, I think some of it's conjecture. He has said there were some people, one of whom actually came back and kind of apologized to him, a woman or a man, I forget, with very strong religious feelings. There are any number of people that they think are of very strong religious persuasion who wanted to persuade him to leave the planet. There is also talk that there have been some more official attempts at getting rid of him, and those could have come from intelligence or military or secret services of any number of countries. I don't know. I'm not privy to it. I don't know if Billy even knows who all of them are, and if he does, even if he said what the sources of them are. Suffice it to say there are witnesses to the attempts in the evenings when people are there. They patrol their grounds with, people carrying assault rifles to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. They take it seriously. I was sitting, I think it was the first year I went over to Switzerland because I wanted to meet these people and him and talk to him. We were sitting on a little bench outside, and a car started to come down the driveway, and I wasn't in a position to see it. Billy apparently saw it and didn't recognize it, and he had been just sitting there, and he got up it was like a tiger kind of a thing of, am I about to be engaged in something? And it was a look in the guy's eyes, and he was just frozen looking down the driveway, and then suddenly he relaxed and sat back down, and someone said to me in English, he didn't know who that was at first. I said, geez, okay, it's not a show for me. People, unless you've actually gone to Switzerland and hung out for whatever purpose, you won't get the feeling of what this is about, because a lot of people, there's a fancy cult there, and people, they're living in the lap of luxury, and it's all about making money and all the other stuff. I just got back a couple of weeks ago, and I can tell you that I've snooped around the place, and I'll tell you, they have some really good equipment. It's mainly in the category of metric wrenches, things to fix their tractors, hose, rakes, and power saws, and anything you need. And I'm not kidding. As a matter of fact, I said it to him, and I said to a couple of other people, I said, this time I'm looking around here, and I'm really impressed with your hinges and the way you've got your rain spouts on, because there's something very deliberate about every little bit of this, and this is not like a fancy American house. So that was my particular fascination. I thought I was going to go and say, okay, I've been here 3 times. Tell me about Extraterrestrial. And all I wanted to talk about at that point was, gee, the way you guys maintain your property, this is, and the animals here, and the way. So I was a bit of a failure for any of my friends that said, well, come back with the latest, important scoop. And I said, well, I got some info for you, but I'm really impressed with the way these people know how to take care of themselves.
Who are these people? How many people are there? Billy's wife has divorced him, apparently.
Right. He's with another woman. They have a child who's about 8 years old.
Right.
There's a couple of people who've been around with him for years. They do their various day jobs. Some people are chefs, waiters, the people who work in computer sales or what have you, school teachers. For people who are not getting a picture of this from anything else they've seen, these are people who live a very different, to my perception, simpler kind of a lifestyle. This is not the sophisticated Hollywood take on, and star things. Meier doesn't appear to have any more status with the people with whom he lives than anybody else. I've seen him in debates and arguments. As a matter of fact, I was just there, and there was a tree trimming going on. This may not interest anybody. Well, I want to know what the UFO is, but this was telling to me. I was working with some friends, and we were helping this guy Silvano, and when it came to taking down the bulk of a tree, we were sawing off the upper limbs and with a remote pole, and I loved it. But when it came to taking the tree down, this was the guy who would have to go up there and with one hand holding the tree and the other hand using a power saw, wearing Kevlar pants so he didn't cut his legs off. He's going to cut down this tree, and Meier's supervising it, and it's all going pretty rapidly in Swiss German, and I can only pick up some of that stuff. And at one point, Meier starts screaming at him like you've never heard, and I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. I mean, he was tearing him a new one, to put it in the vernacular. Finally, what I realized, someone explained to me, the way Silvano had positioned himself, he was unaware that when he cut this one cut into the tree, if he didn't move his body position, the tree would pull and he would be taken off by the chain. This is a very careful guy, but he had not positioned himself right. And so and Meier's yelling at him over the power saw. I mean, I'll address some other stuff for the case, but it was so telling. It was just a very human interaction. What can you do?
How often are sightings still being recorded by Meier?
It's old news over there. People there, there's at least a dozen other photographers. I've talked to people who've seen the ships in the last couple of years.
So it's still happening?
Oh, yeah, sure. They don't get to meet the ETs, but the ships are seen and photographed.
Okay. All right, we'll pause and come back and explore some more of the Billy Meier story with Michael Horn in just a few minutes. Okay, right back with you. Hour number 2 with Michael Horn tonight, talking about Billy Meier. That's a remarkable case that doesn't go away. It just keeps getting more and more curious. All right, now you say craft are still showing up and still being photographed regularly. This is not something that was a long time ago. It's an ongoing event.
Yeah, it's, as I say, it's kind of old news to the people that are there, and it's actually there's a disappointment that's been expressed by Meier and by the alleged ETs in this whole thing, because the focus of the case went so much to the UFO phenomenon part, and they were blaming the people who originally put out the books that they did not really focus on what they consider was important here, which is what they would call the spiritual aspects, information, and focus of the case. And though we might be able to touch a little bit on it, I'm not an expert on it, but I would say to you this, that they have very, very firm and deep points to make about humanity's need to look within itself rather than outside of it.
Okay. Now, what are some of the, and I don't have a list here of things, barbs or whatever, but what are some of the kooky things about Meier that are brought up by people who want to discredit the whole thing? What are some of the negatives especially about his writings and so forth?
I guess you might have to literally help me out, because Let me see if I can remember accusations or anything like that. I mean, people...
Just a couple to give people an idea, that you're aware of them at least.
I'll be honest with you, I'm not trying to hide. It's a little hard if something can pop in my mind. I mean, people just say he's obviously a fake and a phony and it can't be true.
Okay, well, some of the writings, some of the contact notes, they're pretty arcane material, and they're historical in reference.
Right.
Describe, if you would, the paradigm of time that is spanned in the contact notes.
Sure. I see what you're saying. In the material, there are places in the contact notes where Meier is basically given a kind of history lesson on the human species going back ostensibly 22 to 28 million years. Now, that's a big chunk of time. What he was told is that there were, it's kind of the long, long ago, far, far away story, in a distant galaxy.
Sure.
And we're told that there were developing humans who attained great technological skills, in some but not all cases, commensurate spiritual abilities. These people were rather large physically compared to our stature on the planet today. They commanded very powerful craft and weaponry. They were quite warlike. They not only did they fight amongst themselves and literally, in some cases, destroy some of their own home worlds, but they went and exploited throughout the universe, colonizing different planets. Of course, this is all what I would say falls in the category of speculation. It's nothing I can prove. And I've tried to separate facts from speculation. Since we're being asked, in effect, by this material to enter the age of knowledge and leave behind the age of beliefs, until I can do something with that material, and I haven't. I mean, there's histories, and they explain who the Atlanteans were and how Atlantis was actually destroyed and the wars with Lemuria, and this is the kind of thing that will keep somebody up, and it's fascinating, but in all truth, can I say that it's true? I don't know that. I am someone who's willing to give Meier and the material a benefit of the doubt only for one reason, that there is, as best I can tell, nearly 30 years of credible, what I call prophetically accurate scientific and world event-related information.
That we can, in your estimation, document and confirm. So that gives rise to the potential that the ancient materials or the ancient references should be taken a little bit more seriously than perhaps some fables and fairy tales. And in point of fact, some of it falls right into line with some of the normal speculations. It has been long my opinion that humankind or intelligent, sentient, bipedal species of one degree or another have arisen, achieved a certain level of techno-competence, and then crashed over the millennia. I think there has been a revolving door of rises and falls of intelligent beings on this planet. I don't think that's a problem. Does Meier's contact material support that?
In spades. As a matter of fact, they have a lot of different scenarios on it. Long ago, alternately, the planet was used as a penal environment for criminals from different advanced civilizations, so they could leave them here without any technology or means of doing harm. Something that they say we need to establish to have a true and just penal system. They're not advocates of the death penalty, but they believe in lifelong banishment. In other cases, they say some of some of these people may have mingled with some indigenous, early developing Earth humans. In some cases, there were very advanced people stranded here when their technology broke down. Those people degenerated and then would later on be mating with some other more advanced extraterrestrial visitors. I mean, the material, it's a spellbinding tale, but it actually it concurs with your take on it, but it gives so many scenarios of what happened that it's quite fascinating. And if I may, so that I don't forget for tonight, there is prophetic material that deals fundamentally and precisely with these times. I only wanted to, unless you want more, I want to bring up one specific thing that people can read for themselves on the site about Meier's 115th contact in October 78. Now,
okay, these are all numbered. Each contact is numbered. Now, let me ask a question.
Yeah.
The contacts, for our listeners, were they each face-to-face, or were they varying in terms of their interfacing with intelligences? How did they go down?
Virtually all, with the exception of some things that Meier claims are brought to him from a spiritual plane. And again, I can't prove that. What I can address here is that these are face-to-face, voluntary contacts, some of which take place on board a smaller craft or a large mothership craft. They take place close to the Earth or far from it. They take place in his office, on his property, or in fields and meadows. They did. Nowadays, from what I understand, they only take place in his office, and maybe they take him on board the ship, but no more of the remote stuff of going 30 kilometers out in the snow in his moped.
Is he still...
Quite literally is what he did.
With one arm on a moped, 30 kilometers in the snow?
Yeah. Or, wintry conditions, they would send him telepathically. They'd tell him, meet us in such and such a place. He would either be taken in a car by his friends, or sometimes he would simply have to get up and go off on the moped. And, when they were doing all the investigation in the case, and they interviewed all the neighbors, they said, you ever see this guy traveling around? He said, oh yeah, all the time, in all different seasons. Well, what does he have with him? Well, he's on his moped, and he's got a knapsack. And they said, well, what else? Well, he has a camera and a tripod. Well, what about the models or balloons? Or you ever see? And they said, what are you talking about? I mean, they're trying to figure, what do you mean, models and balloons? This guy's got one arm, he's got a knapsack and a tripod, and he goes off on his moped, and that's it. So some of this, it is mind-boggling when you really look at, okay, one-armed guy, off on a moped at Switzerland, 75 or 78, and he's making photos or films with 4 UFOs.
It's eccentric, at the least,
At the very least. So I'll tell you about this one contact because I recently had a little follow-up on it.
One quickie.
Yeah, sure.
Who takes the time to actually write these out? Does Billy?
He does.
Each time. He's
with one hand.
Okay.
Now think about this as well.
I just want to make that clear.
This is so bizarre. It occurred to me just the other day. The German language, unlike English, has lots and lots of capital letters in it. So you might have a sentence or a paragraph where we would only have one capital letter here or there at the beginning or a name because I think nouns or what have you are capitalized. Here's a guy who's virtually with one finger going back and forth and transcribing sometimes dozens of pages at a time of these conversations. And on top of everything else, while he's ostensibly making hoaxed models, raising his family and milking the cows. So I don't know how you can account for this. Nobody else has come forward to say, I'm the other half of this, I'm the money, I have the crew of secretaries. Just, you've got 30 years of this and it's still one guy.
Okay. What about the one contact?
Okay. So in October 19th, 1978, he's taken ostensibly for an up-close personal look at Jupiter, and he remarks to Semyazi about, the rings of Jupiter, that's interesting, and she said, yeah, your world scientists have not yet discovered it, but they will shortly because there's a probe on the way. And so they're conversing, and he's talking to her about another conversation they had, and he said, well, I remember you told me that the moon, Io, is the most volcanically active body in the solar system, and then they start talking about, well, the rings are composed of dust particles that are hurled off, along with other material by these very active volcanoes up at
on Io,
2,300 kilometer per hour propulsion of this material up as far as 180 kilometers off and away from the moon, close enough so that a good amount of it is taken into the rings of Jupiter. Okay, I'll just stop with that little piece. So in March of 1979, we had a probe and discovered that Jupiter had rings. Well, people could argue, it's too close in time. However, in 1998, Cornell University scientists make a new discovery announcement. They have just discovered, they believe, the operative word, that the rings of Jupiter are composed of dust particles coming off of the moons.
Yeah.
Now, they have a distinction. They say they believe those dust particles are liberated from that planetary body by meteorite strikes, throwing up clouds. I got in touch with the chairman of the astronomy department at Cornell University. I had the discussion. He conceded that if Meier knew that was the most volcanically active body in the solar system at that time, that Meier was right, and he's not so sure now that Cornell is right and that Meier is wrong about the actual source of the dust. It makes a lot more sense it's coming from volcanoes propelled up than the after effect of a cloud.
It sure does. Do you happen to know how big Io is compared to our moon?
I know it's significantly smaller, and it's probably somewhere. I know you can find that information, but I don't know it all.
I'm just curious. It's just for our listeners. It's not as big as our moon.
Not at all.
It's much smaller. Okay, interesting concept. And volcanoes spewing material
with 78
to the rings of Jupiter. All right, 1978. Be right back with Michael Horn after this. Okay, let's continue our survey of the Billy Meier case through the eyes and mind and research of Michael Horn. Okay, Michael.
Alrighty. If I may, I wanted to mention this thing about prophecies and the ones that pertain to our times, and I don't know, how much time we'll have to really go into detail. There is a lot here.
What's on tap for us, according to the contacts?
Well,
what
okay.
We have to look forward to.
Alrighty. Well, let me jump around with it so that people can just have an idea. In 1995, Meier himself wrote a document that's called Contact 251, and he presented it ostensibly to the ETs to check it out, and they said, "Yep, that's accurate." So in there were pages and pages of stuff that seemingly projected far into the future with a lot of things that would develop over perhaps even centuries. They did not, he did not put any type of time frame, and things were deliberately, they said, put out of order. Now, one of the things that was in there, there's actually 4 statements he made. One of them described a stunning attack that would shock the entire world conducted by the USA and its president, after which there would be an upsurge in Islamic fundamentalism, and then in this period of time, mad cow disease would start to become more rampant, and it would spread to other animals, and then there would be a new disease and epidemic. These 4 or 5 things were strung right together. I think it's pretty clear from my take on it, and I've checked it, but this referred to the attack in Iraq. What's going to come up now in Iraq, and there's as of April of this year, what he was told, and this next little bit, anybody doesn't have to be an extraterrestrial to hold this point of view, but what they said was this: the near future for Iraq is going to have a lot of, uprising, basically, and the Shiites are going to come in and start fomenting trouble, not that alone is necessary to do it.
Well, I think any number of people can see that coming. It's
Absolutely.
Already happening. They're going to begin to now take out as many American military as they can, or a war of attrition.
Yeah.
It's already beginning. They're telling Americans to either get out or face war, guerrilla war. They want to rule. The funniest thing, they want to rule themselves and control their own oil. Isn't that just amazing?
I know. And well, we did want to give them democracy where they determine their own fate. So, as we both would acknowledge, this isn't news. They simply said that at this point, what will ultimately come in the near future, it looks like a Shiite religious dictatorship. America is going to start pushing at Syria and other Islamic states. But the key to this whole scenario was laid out in 1987 in what was called the Enoch Prophecies. Now, in the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned to you that I saw prophecies from 1981 that I read when I was with my friend Randy back in about 1986 or 7.
Okay.
And in those prophecies, they were describing, among other things, coming wars and what countries were going to be affected, and overthrows of different governments, and a lot of intense stuff. And I thought, gee, this is, a little more than, I can't even figure what this is about. Well, when the prophecies came out in 1987, which I picked up a couple years ago in Switzerland, they were only in German. We went and we had them translated, and they are rather heavy and quite pertinent. What among the things that were put in there, because this was an update of the 81, they said that the World Trade Center would be destroyed by terrorism, and after the destruction of the World Trade Center by terrorism, America would start to kind of twist the arms of other countries to bring them on board for a series of worldwide wars. And they were saying that this was going to be something that was going to negatively affect a lot of different countries. We were not going to be content to just step out a little bit, basically the way they put it. And I should put a little thing in here about prophecy, because what they say is prophecies are probabilities based on the laws of cause and effect of what will take place should we not alter our thinking and our actions. These are not predictions. There are certainly predictions in here, and we've got a ton of them that have already come true, and hopefully these things are not and don't become predictions, meaning prophecies that have gone too far to be rectified. So what they're saying is that, and this was from 87, and basically they said that America, and this is, again, doesn't take an ET, but they said, look, America is generating enormous hatred against itself in many countries, and that the World Trade Center would be, this is going to be the first of an attack against us that is not unconnected.
Which World Trade Center attack were they talking about?
They're talking about the destruction of it. They spell it out, the destruction. And they then speak about this whole thing of how America will go on the march, the different countries that are going to be affected, then what Russia's going to do, what China's going to do, France, Spain, Italy, Germany. And unfortunately, a lot of this has already started to unfold. This is what we're having to look at now and wanting to change.
Okay, all right. Michael Horn's website, and yettheyfly.com is up there for you. Lots of material. Take a look. I'll be back. How often are the Billy Meier contacts continuing in terms of new material being generated by Billy by hand?
Well,
approximately 4 or 5 a year, something like that.
I think it could.
10 a year.
I think it could be more. The problem is most of it is in German, and I'm starting to learn German because I want to read it. I get some newsletters and there's things posted on their German language site, but I don't even know what it is until I run it through a translator. So I'm thinking to myself, I want to know more about this because it's really up to each group, like a language group, to translate the material for themselves if they want it. So they're not in a big crusade to say, we're going to make this available in English and French. So there are interested parties in different countries that take the time to do that. And it's a very long process because they then have to give it back to them to have them check it for accuracy. And it's a real painstaking and often quite slow, to be quite honest.
How quickly does Billy Meier make these contacts available?
I was talking to a fellow there who's kind of like you might say a right-hand man, coordinates a lot of that, and generally he will get the transcript after Billy types it within a pretty short period of time, days to maybe a couple of weeks.
So Meier doesn't sit on this stuff. He puts it out in German as quickly as is comfortable for him, apparently.
Yes, and shares it with, let's say, his closer circle of associates, even before it gets published on a website or published in German.
Now, these are all pretty much face-to-face contacts now in his office. They don't make him take the moped out anymore.
No more moped.
Does that mean someone is beamed down into Billy Meier's office, essentially?
That's what they say.
It is a face-to-face kind of a thing.
And that's been going on that way for almost 30 years. He was talking about that in the earliest times when one or the other or a couple of the ETs would beam into his office, and he also has been beamed into their ship. But again, in fairness to the story, this is the speculative part. I can't prove that stuff.
Right. And what about, I'm sure he must have asked them, can we put this on videotape?
The reason that they had him film the ships and actually do video of the ships was so that they could give enough proof, but nothing that forces people to have to believe it. Why has the skepticism remained for 30 years? It's very important to them that we maintain our free will, which is why they won't give photographs of their faces. There's some shots of arms in spacesuits and things, but they're saying, it's too much. It becomes a cult thing about people. We're trying to undo some of the damage that our own forefathers did millennia ago, starting cults and religions and deities and all that, because it doesn't coordinate with truth.
Right now, the planet is headed in the wrong direction. Environmentally, geopolitically, socially, you name it, it's going down.
Exactly.
Is it not time for these people to forget about the free will issue and step in and make a difference? They seemingly are trying to make a difference, but they're kind of hedging their bets at the same time with this free will issue.
Well, this is the way...
How about the day the Earth stood still?
That's
my scenario, and I say that's the only thing that'll work.
Well, right or wrong, what their take on it is this. Once they do that, let's just say they took it all away and somehow stopped us from warring and destroying ourselves, we don't learn the lesson, and we do not deal with the effect of our cause.
We've never learned any lessons.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you on that. I think maybe a few we've learned, but what what is said here, and it's certainly up for debate, but what is said is, look, you folks have got to wake up and take responsibility. You have empowered the wrong people in your governments. You are, like you're saying, you are going in the wrong direction too fast. And they have said, look, the most dangerous parties on this planet, they had identified as Saddam Hussein, Yasser Arafat, Ariel Sharon, and they reserved most of it for George Bush and company. And they said, and by the way, Islamic fundamentalists are a real big problem, but you can't solve it by going in unilaterally as a country under the pretenses and pretexts that your country did and destroy a bunch of stuff.
Now, that information you just recited could have been given by you...
Anybody.
To anybody in an email. I mean, that's common sense.
Here's the difference.
Right.
There's a part. They said, look, in order to establish peace, and it doesn't mean that this is going to follow and make a lot of sense to anybody, you have to have a genuine, universal, what they call combat peace troop, a force of armed people drawn equally from all the countries on Earth, beholden to none, no special interests, no veto power. They operate under a genuine international law. When you identify the terrorists, when you identify the dictators, the people who are fomenting revolutions, uprisings, wars, that force, once identified, goes to apprehend those people to bring them to trial.
Pipe dreams.
Right, and there's a lot of other positive things that they say we might want to do if we don't want to go through losing 2/3 of the population.
We're going to lose 2/3 of the population.
Well, we'll try to, not to, but to address your real question, why don't they intercede? We really do, you, me, the people that listen, the way that the ripples spread out, we have not only the opportunity, we have the responsibility to do as much as we can to awaken ourselves to, and any others that want to check it out, whether it's through the Meier case or...
I agree, but this is, Michael, this is the age of irrationality. Our society is structurally irresponsible. Children are taught from the beginning that nothing they do is really their fault. It's always someone else's fault. We are not going to wake these people up and change them. They're not going to come around. It's not like you're going to give them a dose of some kind of spiritual smelling salts and they're going to go say, gee, I really am responsible for all the things I've done in my life that aren't necessarily positive. I'm going to take charge of
my life. Well,
it's not
you're
going
right.
to happen.
But
I'm sorry, being a pragmatist, it isn't going to happen like that. Now, that's why I would challenge these people, whoever they are, to knock off the stuff about playing to people's good and better senses and one world army and get serious, or the planet is going to be toast.
Okay, so here's the other part of it, the equation. As I perceive their logic and in the scheme of things, they say, evolution and the development of humanity goes on for countless millions of years, even way beyond that. If you folks, in the process of learning your lessons, set yourself back and you have to do it again, you won't make that mistake again when you get to this type of a threshold. While you may say, hey, somebody come and intercede and help wake us up, stop this madness, the laws of cause and effect are saying, folks, unless you do it, you're going to pay the price, and some other people are going to watch up to the point that the planet itself could be destroyed.
Well,
doesn't feel good.
I say this thing has happened time and time again over the millennia. I think it's nothing new. I do not think we learn from history to speak of. We certainly don't have access to our ancient history. We don't even know where the knowledge to build the pyramids really came from officially, formally. We keep finding evidences of long-lost civilizations, and scientists keep ignoring it. I mean, it's a game. It's pretty silly. The footprints of intelligent beings on this planet who lived long ago are all over the place, but we ignore it. So how do we learn from the past? All right, let's pause on that note and come back in just a couple minutes with Michael Horn. Hi, right back with Michael Horn. And we've surveyed some of the Billy Meier dimensions tonight. There's a lot of material. Go ahead, Michael. What would you like to bring in our last segment here?
Well, just a quick comment that what can be found in the material. You mentioned the pyramids. According to these Plejaren people, the pyramids are actually 73,000 or so years old, built by people from the Orion system, as were many other pyramid structures on the planet. Way older than even the...
Talking about the primary pyramids at Giza.
Giza, correct.
Okay, now there are, as people who are listening know, There are other pyramids, the Step Pyramid and other lesser pyramids that are in rather crumbling decay.
Right.
It has been my suspicion that those lesser pyramids, architecturally, structurally, and all the rest of it, were probably built by people trying to emulate the magnificent three, which were built long ago. However long ago, we don't know. Can you just imagine, though, what those looked like when they were encased in that polished limestone?
It was limestone with a capping on it and all of that. There's quite a bit of information on what the pyramids were originally for, how they were used for survival of peoples when there were worldwide catastrophes. But just as you say, people would have to start looking at this stuff. May I, for at least speak on behalf of the publisher, I know that the book is currently not available. They're out. They're going to get more. But if people are interested, and there's a guy named Gene Andrade who wrote a nice book called Star Wisdom, and he put in his own words a lot of the philosophical and spiritual principles. That's a nice book. But getting back to the material, just
Gene was on the program.
Was he? Oh, great.
So several years ago. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, a really nice book, and just in material that has never officially been published broadly. Years ago, they wrote, prior to Reagan fulfilling his presidency, they wrote about him, and they said, and I was a non-political person, so it didn't matter to me one way or the other, but when I read this, I was a little startled. They said that this would be a man who would be pivotal in setting the world on a course for the next world war. He would arm dictators and dictatorships, he would operate through military power, and demonize a lot of people and blah, blah. He would dismantle protections. They were laying out some of the negatives on him and Alexander Haig. In the Meier material, you'll find things where they claim that TWA-800 was taken down accidentally by a U.S. Navy missile. They also are on the camp that says the first moon landing didn't happen. I mean, there's so much stuff in here, some of which coincides with other people.
Wait a minute. Who said the first moon landing didn't happen?
Plejaren. People that Meier meets with, they said that was hoaxed, and that the other subsequent ones, if I understand correctly, were genuine. But they said the first one did not happen. They have commented on everything from abortion to illegal immigration, from sunscreens to sudden infant death syndrome, from why alcohol is dangerous due to deterioration due to I mean, you can almost imagine almost anything you would want to ask people if you had the opportunity, who presumably had access to more knowledge and information. Meier has asked, or they've simply started talking to him about things, and he's put it down in these contact notes. So,
what was the reason given for the hoaxing, in their words, of the first moon landing?
Now,
politics? Power?
I think it was. I think it was the thing of wanting to appear to be far ahead of the Russians and intimidate them. This stuff, although it interested me, I did not go in and really read that part and and glue it into my mind. But I do remember that they've said that was not the genuine thing. And there is so much. And I can't tell you that it's all true. Again, there's so much material in here, things that have not yet occurred, when in the 1981 and 87 prophecies, they talk about cloned fighting machines, meaning cloned warriors and laser weapons and other types of weapons that certainly didn't exist in 81 or 87, and many of which they're saying this will play a part should we be so foolish as to have this Third World War. Down the road, these things appear. They say there's 2 more popes to come. The errors. Pardon me?
And that's it?
That's it. With the appearance of the last pope comes the fall of the Catholic Church. They long ago spoke about the scandals of pedophilia that would arise in the church. Some of this is back in the prophecies, that we had charted. There's many things back as far as the 70s, 80s, 90s, where they listed one earthquake or volcanic event or war or something anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of years in advance. And those things all occurred that way.
All you got to do is pick one big lottery winner.
Yeah, right. If that was enough,
more people than anything else.
Yeah, but you know how humans are. We only learn a lesson that may not really serve us in the long run. And of course, like other people, they've said that the SARS, virus is something that broke out due to a lab accident in Guangdong province in China.
When did they say that?
They said that was just April. This year they just said that. But the fact that they mentioned the new epidemics, and that Meier even said that in 95, plus they also have that in the 1981 and 87. They've said that the Red Chinese will ultimately attack India, killing between 25 and 30 million people in the New Delhi region with biological weapons. So then you start thinking, well, wait, they're developing SARS thing, maybe that's the development of a biological weapon. Before, in the 87 prophecy, they even said India and Pakistan may be misled into a nuclear exchange with each other, something that they almost did last year. Now, that was written in 87. So if we want to, is the Meier case true? I mean, it would be the most important event in human history. Can we prove it? Not to everybody's satisfaction. Is there enough compelling information to make one think? And if so, are we wise enough to take from the case those things which will help us individually and collectively, along with the other sources of our assistance, terrestrially and otherwise, to wake up and get this thing straightened out? Are we just preaching to the choir when you and I speak and people that listen to this? There's a lot of questions here, but my passion for this is because of what I can show to be so. When I have a book here with Meier's Jupiter information in the 20 years before Cornell University, how did you fake it?
Well, interesting conversation you related a few minutes ago about you and who was it at Cornell again?
Dr. Joseph Vaverka, professor, chairman of the Department of Astronomy.
Yeah.
And we had a couple conversations, and the more information I sent him, the more quiet he got. But to his credit, he at least acknowledged that Meier had to be right about Io, and he said, I don't know how, but he's right. Well, these scientists don't like it that some farmer, is meeting with ETs presumably and taking a look at, Venus and Jupiter.
Sure.
But there's tons of other information there. Meier predicted that they discovered 10 years or so before it happened. He predicted there would be a comet, and it would be called Tutatis, and it would come back in September of 2004, and that was discovered by the French. It was named Tutatis. He's also talked about the two planets beyond Pluto that we'll discover. I mean, there's so much in here when you go onto the website from
Two planets beyond Pluto. Now, are they, there have been little orbiting moons around which are almost as big as Pluto, which some people say are planets?
Yeah.
Not that. He's talking about something else.
They're a bit larger in my understanding. They refer to them as trans-Pluto and Uni. I think Uni is also called, hold on to your hats, Nibiru. The self-same...
By whom?
By the Plejarens. I believe they've said that's what people call Nibiru. It's not an inhabited, certainly not at this point, planetary...
It's a Pluto-sized piece of rock.
Or thereabouts. And then there's a lot of other stuff that has to do with cosmic events. David Froning is a physicist that I met about a dozen years ago, a well-known hyperspace propulsion expert. He told an audience of 450 people, we take this case very seriously. We've made breakthroughs in our understanding of zero-point energy from looking at the Meier films and from reading. He said, how could Meier, 5 years before I, meaning he, was discussing tachyons, how could Meier be writing about tachyon propulsion systems and presenting figures that are within 20% of the calculations that I and other scientists come up with using very complex formulas, and this man's living in Switzerland, in the boonies? Mm-hmm. So this, I'm talking fast because this is the preponderance of what you end up with when you fall into this case and you start looking and you...
Well, that's a huge amount of data.
Huge. It's how many thumbs do you have to put in how many holes in the dike to make it not real? That's where I come from.
Tachyon.
Tachyon.
I haven't heard people talking about tachyon beads and tachyon things for years now.
Right.
But tell us, we have just a minute and a half left. Tachyon beads are allegedly able to somehow vector zero-point energy.
I don't know if that's been scientifically proven or not. I bought some of that stuff in the...
Yeah, well, that's the word.
Yeah.
There's some etheric energy that the tachyon beads are able to focus.
Maybe so. And interestingly enough, Meier was writing about tachyons and that stuff in 75 or 6 when he was taken on board for a hyperspace, ostensibly on a huge ship, big trip into space. And they were explaining to him about tachyon propulsion and how space and time travel is done by reducing everything in a ship to basically the spiritual energy conveyed with tachyons beamed into the time and place, and it remanifests in a part piece of a second. You don't lose time. I mean, this guy was writing this stuff in 75. He's not Ray Bradbury.
That's interesting.
And it goes on and on.
Michael, thank you. You've really presented it all very well, very lucidly. I think it's provocative. It always will be.
Yeah.
People can do with it, as you said, they can do with it as they will. All they have to do is go to your website and do some research, do some reading. Keep me posted, as I know you will.
You know I will.
I appreciate your time and your dedication. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Michael.
Good night.
Michael Horn, okay, and yettheyfly.com is the website. All right, that's our program tonight. We'll pause and talk.